You know, that question about feeling truly heard
Right.
is a great segue into this next section.
Okay.
Because for Freire, that experience of genuine dialogue where voices are valued and perspectives are shared is absolutely crucial for overcoming internalized oppression.
So we're picking up where we left off,
Right.
diving deeper into those psychological effects of oppression. We've
Yeah.
talked about, how the oppressor's voice can take root in the minds of the oppressed. But like, what does that actually look like day to day?
Well, you see this manifested in all sorts of, subtle ways.
Mhm.
And one of the YouTube videos used this really striking phrase, hosts of the oppressor,
Oh, wow.
to describe how individuals can become carriers of the very ideology
Yeah.
that's keeping them down. It's almost like a mental colonization,
Right.
where the oppressor's values and beliefs become so ingrained
Mm.
that they're mistaken for one's own.
It's like the Matrix.
Yeah.
You don't
Right.
even realize you're trapped within that system.
Yeah, it's a powerful analogy. And in the book, Freire talks about how this internalization can lead to a paradoxical fear of freedom.
Oh, wow.
He argues that people who've been oppressed for a long time might actually shy away from opportunities for liberation
Okay.
because it feels so unfamiliar
Right.
and even terrifying.
That makes sense. It's like if you've been living in a tiny room your whole life, the thought of suddenly having like wide open spaces
Right.
might be exhilarating, but also completely overwhelming. Like,
Exactly.
where do you even begin
Right. Where do you even begin?
to navigate that?
Exactly. And the YouTube transcripts, they provide some really compelling examples of this. They talk about how this fear of freedom can manifest in everything from staying in dead-end jobs
Ah,
to tolerating abusive relationships.
right.
It's like this subconscious belief that this is all I deserve, or I'm not capable of anything better.
It's heartbreaking, and I'm guessing this internalized oppression makes it even harder to fight for change.
Absolutely.
It's like you're battling not just the external forces, but also your own
Right.
inner demons.
Yeah, exactly. And Freire highlights how this internal conflict can manifest as self-deprecation.
Okay.
The oppressed might internalize
Yeah.
the negative labels
Right.
placed upon them by the oppressors,
Mm-hmm.
leading to these feelings of inferiority and inadequacy.
I remember that quote from the peasant in the book. They call themselves ignorant and say the professor's the one who has knowledge.
Yes,
It's like it's a perfect example of how that language can become their
exactly.
inner monologue.
It's a tragic cycle, and it's further complicated by what Freire calls horizontal violence,
Okay.
where the oppressed, instead of uniting against their common enemy, turn their frustration and aggression
Right.
towards each other.
Makes sense.
The YouTube videos they mention, Frantz Fanon, whose work on colonialism really explored this in depth, he argued that the colonized, unable to direct their anger towards the colonizer, often end up lashing out at those closest to them,
Right.
their families, their neighbors,
Yeah.
even themselves.
Like a classic divide and conquer.
Exactly.
It's strategy, right? The oppressors maintain control by keeping the oppressed fighting amongst themselves.
Exactly. And this leads to what Freire calls necrophilic behavior,
Okay.
his tendency towards destruction, both of oneself and of others.
Right.
It's a bleak picture.
Yeah.
But Freire doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of oppression. He recognizes that it's not just an external force,
Yeah.
but also a psychological wound that can fester and distort our perceptions of ourselves and the world.
So if we're stuck in this cycle of, internalized oppression and horizontal violence, how do we break free? What's the antidote to this necrophilia?
Well, Freire argues that the path to liberation starts with a shift in consciousness. It's about moving from a state of what he calls submersion, where we're blindly accepting the dominant narratives,
Right.
to a state of emergence,
Okay.
where we start to critically question the status quo
Right.
and recognize our own agency.
So it's going from like passively accepting the truth handed down to you to like actively seeking out your own.
Yes. And Freire believed that this process of awakening couldn't be achieved through propaganda or slogans.
Right.
He saw those methods as just another form of manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
another way for the oppressor to impose their will.
Right.
Instead, he advocated for what he called conscientization,
Okay.
a process of critical reflection and dialogue that allows individuals to uncover their own oppression and develop a plan for liberation.
So it's about empowering people to think for themselves rather
Yeah.
than telling them what to think.
Absolutely. And One of the most powerful tools for fostering this critical thinking is dialogue. Remember we talked about how internalized oppression is like having the oppressor's voice in your head?
Right.
Well, dialogue is a way to start pushing back against that voice, to start developing your own counter-narrative.
And in one of the YouTube videos, they use this example of a group of workers who were initially hesitant to speak up about their unfair working conditions.
Right.
But as they started to engage in open and honest dialogue with each other,
Yeah.
they began to realize that their experiences weren't isolated incidents,
Right.
but rather symptoms of a larger system of exploitation.
Exactly.
And that collective awareness gave them the courage to organize and demand change.
That's a perfect illustration of how dialogue can help dismantle
Right.
internalized oppression and spark collective action. It's about recognizing that our individual struggles are often connected to larger systems of power, and that we have more power when we work together.
The people united will never be defeated.
Exactly. And Freire believed that this unity is essential for overcoming oppression. He argued that true liberation can only come from within through a process of collective struggle and mutual support.
But wait, I thought Freire emphasized the importance of the oppressed leading their own liberation.
Right.
Doesn't that collective action require leadership?
You're absolutely right to point that out.
Okay.
And this is where Freire gets really nuanced. He recognized the need for leadership in social movements,
Right.
but he cautioned against those who try to save the oppressed
Right.
without truly trusting them to guide the process.
So it's not about swooping in as a savior figure and
Yeah.
dictating what needs to be done.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Freire argued that true solidarity comes from walking alongside the oppressed, listening to their experiences and supporting their efforts to reclaim their agency.
Right.
He even criticized those who use what he called instruments of domestication,
Okay.
like propaganda and empty slogans, to manipulate the oppressed into following their lead.
It's that give a man a fish, teach a man to fish
Exactly.
analogy, right? Freire's all about empowering the oppressed to become their own fishermen, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of co-intentional education comes in.
Co-intentional education. Now, that's a new one. What exactly does that mean?
It's essentially the idea that both teachers and students, or in the context of liberation, both leaders and followers,
Okay.
should be actively engaged in the process of learning and transformation.
So it's about breaking down those traditional power dynamics between the expert and the student
Exactly.
and creating a more collaborative
Yeah.
and egalitarian relationship.
Exactly. Freire believed that true education, whether in the classroom or in the streets,
Right.
should be a dialogue, a shared journey of discovery, where everyone's perspectives are valued.
That's such a refreshing approach. It moves away from this idea of knowledge as something that's passively received
Right.
and instead sees it as something that's actively co-created through dialogue
that's-
and shared experience.
Precisely. And for Freire, this co-intentional approach was essential for fostering the critical consciousness needed for liberation.
Right.
He believed that it was only through this process of mutual learning and collective struggle that the oppressed could truly break free from what he called culture of silence imposed upon them by the oppressor.
This is all incredibly insightful. I mean, it's making me rethink a lot of my own assumptions about leadership and education and even just, the nature of knowledge itself. So as we kind of wrap up this second part of our deep dive into Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, what are some key things you want listeners to be taking away?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that true liberation is not just about external change.
Okay.
It's also about internal transformation.
So dismantling both the physical and the psychological structures of oppression.
Exactly. And this requires a constant process of critical reflection, dialogue, and collective action.
It's about waking up to the ways in which we've internalized the oppressor's narrative and then consciously choosing to write our own stories, both individually and collectively.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And as we move into the third and final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What does it mean to decolonize your mind?